Fix it, or don't speak. The words didn't just land. They cut through the room like a blade wrapped in velvet, sharp enough to silence even the clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of conversations worth more than most people's yearly salary. Heads turned, not toward the man who said it, but toward the woman he said it to. Naomi Brooks didn't move. She stood still beside the table, a tray balanced effortlessly in one hand, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. To them, she was invisible until she wasn't. Just a waitress. Just another uniform in a room built for power. The private dining suite on the 47th floor overlooked the entire city, glass walls stretching from polished marble to the ceiling, the skyline glowing like a promise only a few could afford. Inside, the air was thick with pressure. Not the loud kind. The quiet, suffocating kind that came when millions, no, hundreds of millions, hung on a single decision. Ethan Caldwell sat at the center of it all, fingers tapping once against a leather-bound folder before pushing it forward across the table. "There's a flaw in the model," he said, his voice calm but edged with irritation. "We've spent 6 weeks, and still no one's fixed it." Around him, his team avoided eye contact. Engineers, analysts, people with degrees framed in glass and salaries that could buy houses outright. None of them spoke. None of them had an answer. And that was when his gaze flicked, brief, dismissive, toward Naomi. "You," he said, barely looking at her. "You've been standing there long enough. Fix it, and I'll give you $100 million. A few chuckles slipped out. Not loud, just enough. Enough to remind her exactly where she stood in their world. Someone leaned back in their chair, amused. Another shook his head, smirking into his glass of bourbon. It wasn't an offer. It was a performance. Naomi didn't react. Not to the laughter. Not to the weight of every "I" suddenly measuring her worth in silence. She simply set the tray down beside her, the soft click against the table barely audible, but somehow louder than everything else. Because in that moment, something shifted. Not in the room. In her. They didn't see it. They couldn't. They were too busy seeing what they expected to see. A black woman in a pressed uniform. A server trained to smile, to nod, to disappear between courses and conversations. They didn't see the way her eyes moved, not randomly, but precisely, tracking the open pages of the document like she had already been reading it long before anyone noticed. They didn't see the stillness in her hands, not hesitation, but control, the kind that comes from knowing something others don't. Ethan leaned back in his chair, already bored with his own challenge, already turning his attention back to the deal slipping through his fingers. "Relax," he muttered to no one in particular. "It's not like she's actually going to, may I?" The words were soft, calm, but they didn't ask for permission. They took space. The room shifted again. This time, people noticed. Ethan paused, just for a fraction of a second, his eyes finally landing on her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. Really at her. It was the first time. Naomi stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the table with quiet certainty. No rush, no nerves, just movement that felt intentional. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the document before she gently turned it toward herself, scanning the numbers, the equations, the assumptions written in confident ink. Around her, the room held its breath. Not because they believed in her, but because they didn't. And doubt, when it's about to be proven wrong, has a way of making everything feel heavier. Naomi's eyes moved once more across the page. Then she exhaled. Not a sigh, not frustration, recognition. "It's not a flaw," she said, her voice steady, clear enough to reach every corner of the room without ever needing to rise. "It's a misinterpretation." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, because for the first time that night, the power in the room didn't belong to the man who owned it. It hovered, quietly, in the hands of someone they had already decided didn't matter. The air did not return to normal. It shifted, recalibrated, like the room itself was trying to catch up to what had just happened. No one reached for their drink. No one checked their phone. The skyline outside still glittered, but inside, something far more unsettling had taken hold. Ethan Caldwell leaned back slowly, but this time it was not the relaxed confidence of a man in control. It was measured, intentional. His eyes remained on Naomi, studying her the way he studied markets, risks, opportunities, patterns. And right now, she did not fit any pattern he trusted. You said the model breaks under threshold behavior, he began, his voice calm again, but different now, stripped of the earlier edge. That is not something you guess. That is something you know. Naomi did not rush to answer. She adjusted the position of a glass slightly to the left, a small, almost habitual movement, before looking back at him. Yes, she said. Just that. No explanation. No elaboration. Across the table, one of the senior analysts leaned forward, curiosity overriding pride. Where did you learn that? He asked, unable to mask the question that had already spread across every face in the room. Naomi's gaze flickered briefly toward the window, the city lights reflecting faintly in her eyes, then back to the table. I studied it, she replied. Again, simple. But this time, the simplicity felt heavier. Ethan's fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the table. Studied where? He asked. Not aggressively. Precisely. Naomi held his gaze for a moment longer, then lowered it just slightly, not in submission, but in thought. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, she said. The words did not echo. They landed. Clean. Direct. Final. Someone let out a quiet breath. Another shifted in their chair. The analyst who had confirmed her solution blinked, then blinked again, as if the information refused to settle into place. You are saying you studied systems modeling at MIT? He asked, his tone caught somewhere between disbelief and recalculation. Naomi nodded once. I did. Silence again. But this time, it was different from before. Not disbelief. Not tension. Recognition trying to form. Ethan's expression did not change immediately, but something behind his eyes did. A detail connecting. A gap closing. Did, he repeated. Past tense. Naomi's hands remained steady, resting lightly at her sides. Yes. The room waited. Not for the answer. For the reason. Because in a space like this, where everything was explained by success, by upward movement, by visible achievement, there was only one question left that mattered. Why was she here? Ethan did not ask it directly. He did not need to. The question was already in the air. Naomi seemed to sense it. Or maybe she had sensed it long before anyone else. I left before finishing, she said, her voice still even, still controlled. No apology. No shame. Just fact. A faint crease formed between Ethan's brows. You left, he said, from one of the most competitive programs in the country. Naomi met his gaze again. Yes. He studied her for another moment. Longer this time. Not searching for flaws. Searching for truth. People do not leave places like that without a reason, he said quietly. Naomi did not answer right away. The pause stretched, but it did not feel uncomfortable. It felt deliberate. Chosen. Sometimes, she said finally, life changes faster than plans do. No one spoke after that. Not because they did not want to. Because there was nothing left to challenge. The explanation did not fill the room. It settled into it, grounding everything that had come before. The intelligence. The precision. The calm. It all made sense now. But that understanding brought something else with it. Discomfort. Because if someone like her could stand in a room like this, unnoticed, underestimated, dismissed, then what else had they been missing? Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning forward again, his hands folding together on the table. The deal was saved. The problem was solved. But that was no longer the center of the moment. He looked at Naomi not as a server, not as a stranger, but as a variable he had failed to account for. And in his world, the most dangerous variables were always the ones you never saw coming. Naomi Brooks, he said, her name steady on his tongue this time. Why are you working here? The question was not rhetorical. It was not casual. It carried weight. Because now, finally, it mattered. The question did not rush her, but it did not let her hide either. It settled between them, quiet and direct, carrying more weight than any number on the page ever could. Naomi did not look away. She did not fidget, did not shift her stance, did not reach for the safety of movement. She simply stood there, holding the space that had suddenly been given to her. Because I needed to be, she said. The answer was not defensive. It was not apologetic. It was complete in its simplicity. Ethan's gaze narrowed slightly, not in skepticism, but in focus. That is not an explanation, he replied, his tone steady, almost softer than before. Naomi nodded once, acknowledging the truth in his words without feeling the need to correct them. Around the table, the others leaned in without realizing it, drawn by something they could not quite name. It was no longer about the deal. It was about her. I had a scholarship, Naomi continued, her voice even, her pace unhurried. Full tuition, housing, everything covered. She paused, just long enough for the room to understand what that meant. But my mother got sick during my second year. The words did not come with dramatics. They did not need to. They carried their own gravity. A few eyes dropped, not out of discomfort, out of recognition. There was no one else, she added. No one to take care of her. No one to manage the bills. No one to make sure she had what she needed. Ethan remained still, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. Naomi continued, not because she was asked, but because the moment allowed it. I try to do both, she said. Classes during the day, hospital at night, work in between. A faint exhale moved through the room, almost inaudible, as if someone had just realized how fragile the balance must have been. It worked, she said, and for the first time, there was the slightest shift in her tone. Not pride, not regret, just honesty. Until it did not. Silence again. But this silence was different. It was not empty. It was full of understanding that no one had spoken out loud. Ethan's fingers loosened slightly against the table. So you left? He said quietly. Naomi met his gaze. Yes. He nodded once, absorbing the answer without interruption. And after that, he asked. Not pushing, not prying, just following the line of truth she had already drawn. Naomi glanced briefly at the tray beside her, then back at him. After that, I worked, she said. Wherever I could. Restaurants, cafes, anywhere that paid enough to keep things going. The words were simple, but the meaning beneath them was not. Because in a room where success was measured in millions, where timelines were plotted in quarters and years, her story existed in a different unit entirely. Day to day, shift to shift. And your mother? Someone asked quietly from the far end of the table, the question slipping out before it could be stopped. Naomi's expression softened, just slightly. She is better now, she said. Stronger than she was. A small nod followed, more to herself than to anyone else. The tension in the room eased, but it did not disappear. It transformed. What had once been judgment now felt like something closer to reflection. Because every person at that table understood sacrifice. They just understood it differently. Ethan leaned back once more, but this time there was no distance in it. No separation. His eyes remained on Naomi, steady, thoughtful. You solved a problem my entire team could not fix, he said. In less than a minute. Naomi did not respond. She did not need to. And you are serving tables, he added, the words not sharp, but weighted with implication. Naomi tilted her head slightly, not in challenge, but in perspective. For now, she said. 2 words. Calm. Certain. They did not sound temporary. They sounded chosen. That was what shifted the room again. Not her past, not her explanation, but the quiet certainty that she was not waiting to be rescued. She was simply moving forward, one step at a time, on her own terms. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering for a brief moment before returning to hers. The numbers, the deal, the projections, all of it still mattered. But something else had entered the equation now. Something he could not quantify. Something he had not planned for. Respect. And unlike money, it could not be offered lightly. It had to be earned. And for the first time that night, Ethan Caldwell understood that the person standing across from him had already done exactly that. Respect did not announce itself. It did not arrive with applause or declarations. It settled quietly, shifting the balance of the room in a way no one could ignore, even if no one said it out loud. Ethan Caldwell leaned forward again, slower this time, his hands no longer resting in casual control, but placed deliberately on the table, as if grounding himself in the moment. His eyes moved from the document to Naomi, then back again, as if recalculating not the numbers, but the person who had just changed them. You said the constraint was wrong. He began, his voice measured, analytical again, but no longer dismissive. Explain it. It was not a challenge. It was an invitation. Naomi stepped closer to the table, not as a server responding to a request, but as someone stepping into a role she had not been given permission to take, yet had already earned. She turned the document slightly, aligning it so everyone could see. You assumed stability within a fixed range, she said, pointing to a section of the model. But your dataset includes outliers that are not noise. They are signals. One of the analysts frowned, leaning in. We filtered those out to clean the model, he said. Naomi shook her head once. That is the problem, she replied. You remove the behavior that actually defines the system under pressure. The words landed differently now. No one laughed. No one dismissed them. They followed. Carefully. Ethan's gaze sharpened again, not with skepticism, but with interest. So the system is not failing, he said slowly. It is behaving exactly as it should. Naomi nodded. Yes. You are just measuring it incorrectly. The room absorbed that. A shift in perspective. Not a broken system. A misunderstood one. It was subtle, but it changed everything. The analyst who had run the numbers earlier leaned back, exhaling quietly. That would explain the inconsistencies, he murmured, almost to himself. Naomi continued, her voice steady, her pace controlled. If you adjust the constraint to account for threshold behavior, the model stabilizes naturally. You do not need to force it. She tapped lightly on the page, indicating the simple change she had already made. You just need to let it be what it is. Silence followed again, but this time it was not tension. It was clarity settling into place. Ethan's lips pressed together briefly, his mind moving quickly behind his calm exterior. Run a full simulation with her adjustment, he said, not taking his eyes off the page. No hesitation this time. The analyst moved immediately, fingers flying across the screen, inputting the revised parameters. The room watched, not impatiently, but intently. Because now, the outcome mattered in a different way. Not just for the deal, for what it represented. The seconds passed. Then the analyst stopped. He did not speak right away. He looked at the screen, then back at the document, then at Naomi. It is stable, he said finally. Across all test conditions. A quiet wave moved through the room. Not excitement. Not relief. Something deeper. Recognition of a truth that had been missed until now. Ethan leaned back slightly, his eyes lifting from the table to Naomi once more. You simplified a problem we overcomplicated, he said. Naomi gave a small nod. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one people ignore first, she replied. There was no arrogance in it. Just observation. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, then glanced around the table, taking in the faces of his team, the people he trusted to solve problems like this. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. The result was already clear. He turned back to Naomi, his expression unreadable but focused. Earlier, he said, his voice steady, I made an offer. The words hung there, carrying the weight of the moment that had started it all. A few heads shifted slightly, attention sharpening once again. Ethan did not rush the next part. $100 million, he continued, his tone even, but now stripped of the mockery it once held. For fixing the problem. Naomi did not react immediately. She did not smile. She did not look surprised. She simply met his gaze, calm as before. Because for her, the number had never been the point. And somehow, everyone in that room understood that now. The power had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. And for the first time that night, the man who controlled everything in that room realized that what he was about to say next mattered far more than the offer itself. The number did not impress her. It hung in the air, heavy, almost surreal to everyone else in the room. But Naomi Brooks did not lean toward it, did not reach for it, did not even let it touch her expression. $100 million. For most people, it would have changed everything in an instant. For her, it changed nothing about what had already happened. Ethan Caldwell watched her carefully, as if waiting for a reaction that never came. No widened eyes. No sharp inhale. No shift in posture. Just the same calm presence that had walked into the problem and rewritten it without asking permission. I meant what I said, he continued, his voice steady, but now carrying something quieter beneath it. Not authority. Intention. You fixed it. Naomi tilted her head slightly, not dismissing his words, but placing them where they belonged. I clarified it, she replied. It was already there. A faint shift moved across Ethan's expression, something close to acknowledgement. Either way, he said, the outcome is the same. He reached into his jacket slowly, not for show, not for effect, but with purpose. The room watched again, the tension returning, but in a different form now. Not anticipation of failure. Anticipation of decision. Ethan placed a sleek, black card on the table, sliding it forward just enough to rest between them. This is not a gesture, he said. It is a door. Naomi's eyes dropped briefly to the card, then lifted back to him. She did not touch it. Around them, the others remained still, sensing that whatever happened next was not about money, or business, or even the deal that had nearly collapsed minutes ago. It was about something far less predictable. You do not belong here, Ethan added, his voice quieter now, not as a judgment, but as an observation. Not in this role. Naomi's gaze did not waver. Everyone belongs somewhere, she said. This is where I am. The simplicity of her answer landed deeper than any argument could have. Ethan studied her again, longer this time, as if searching for the edges of her certainty and finding none. You walked away from one path, he said. That does not mean you should stay on the wrong one. Naomi considered that for a moment, her eyes shifting briefly toward the window again, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Lights, movement, possibility. Then she looked back at him. It was not the wrong path, she said. It was the necessary one. The words did not challenge him. They corrected the assumption behind his question. A subtle difference, but an important one. Ethan exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping once against the table, not out of impatience, but thought. Then consider this the next step, he said. Not because you need it, because you have earned it. The room held still again. Not because they expected her to accept, because they realized she might not. Naomi glanced down at the card once more, then back at Ethan. There was no hesitation in her eyes. Only clarity. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Not the money, not the number, the meaning behind it. Ethan's answer came without delay. A position, he said, directly under my lead team. Full authority to work on systems like this. Resources, access, the kind of environment where what you just did is not ignored. Naomi listened, her expression unchanged, but her attention sharp. And the money? She asked. Ethan paused, just briefly. That was the wrong way to start, he admitted. This is not about buying what you did. It is about recognizing what you can do. A quiet shift moved through the room again, because that was not something they had heard from him before. Not like this. Not without edge. Naomi let the silence sit for a moment, letting his words settle into something real. Then she spoke. You offered $100 million, she said, her voice calm, steady. Because you thought I would not be able to fix it. Ethan did not interrupt. Now you are offering opportunity, she continued, because I did. She let the distinction hang there, clear and undeniable. Those are two very different things. Ethan nodded once. They are. Naomi's gaze held his for another second, then shifted, just slightly, as if weighing something only she could see. The room waited, not for the answer they wanted, for the answer she believed. Because whatever she said next would not just define her. It would define the moment itself. And for the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room was not the one deciding what came next. The silence did not break. It deepened. It stretched across the room like a line no one dared to cross, because everyone understood that whatever Naomi Brooks said next would not just answer a question. It would define the value of everything that had happened. Naomi looked at the card again, then at Ethan, her expression calm but focused, as if she were measuring something far more complex than an offer. You are right, she said finally. They are two different things. Her voice was steady, but there was a subtle shift in it now. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, clarity forming into decision. Ethan did not move. He did not interrupt. For once, he let the moment belong entirely to someone else. Naomi took a small step forward, not toward the card, but toward the center of the table, placing herself fully into the space she had already changed. You offered money when you thought I could not solve it, she continued. And now you are offering opportunity because I did. She paused, letting the weight of that distinction settle again, deeper this time. But neither of those things actually see me. A slight movement rippled through the room. Not disagreement. Discomfort. Because the truth, when spoken without anger, has a way of landing harder. Ethan's gaze held hers, unflinching, but something behind it shifted. Not defensiveness. Recognition. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You saw a problem, she said. Then you saw a solution. Her eyes stayed locked on his. But you have not asked what I want. The room stilled again. Completely. Because that question had never been part of the equation. Not for him. Not for anyone at that table. Ethan inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes when control meets something it cannot immediately shape. Then tell me, he said, his voice lower now, more measured than before. What do you want? Naomi did not answer right away. Her gaze drifted, just for a moment, across the room. The polished table. the expensive suits, the quiet tension that had once been filled with certainty. Then back to him. "I want to finish what I started," she said. The words were simple, but they carried a direction that cut through everything else. Ethan's expression tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in thought. "MIT," he said. Naomi nodded once. "Yes." He leaned back slightly, processing, recalculating, but this time not in numbers. "In possibilities. You would walk away from this," he said, gesturing lightly toward the card. "To go back." Naomi's answer came without delay. "I would not call it walking away," she said. "I would call it moving forward." The distinction was quiet, but it shifted the meaning entirely. Around the table, the others exchanged brief glances, not speaking, but understanding. Because in a room built on acceleration, on scaling upward, she had just chosen something different. Completion. Ethan studied her again, longer now, his usual certainty replaced by something more deliberate. "You could do both," he said. "Work with us. Finish your degree. We have the resources to make that possible." Naomi listened, but her expression did not change. "Resources were never the only barrier," she replied. "Time matters. Focus matters. And intention matters." Each word landed cleanly, without force, but impossible to ignore. Ethan's fingers pressed lightly against the table again, a small, controlled movement that revealed just enough of the shift inside him. "So what you are saying," he began slowly, "is that this is not the right time." Naomi held his gaze. "I am saying that I decide when the right time is." The room absorbed that, not as defiance, as ownership. Ethan nodded once, slowly, the motion deliberate, as if acknowledging a truth he could not argue with. "Fair enough," he said. He reached forward then, not to take the card back, but to adjust it slightly, turning it so it faced her more directly. "Then this stays with you," he added. Naomi glanced down at it again, then back at him. "Not as a transaction," he continued. "As an option." The word hung there, lighter than before, but more meaningful. Naomi considered it for a moment, then reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the card before lifting it from the table. Not quickly, not hesitantly, intentionally. The room shifted again, not because she accepted, but because of how she did it. She did not take it as an answer. She took it as a choice she would define later. Naomi slipped the card into the pocket of her apron, her posture unchanged, her presence steady. Then she picked up her tray again, the same simple motion she had made at the beginning of the night. But nothing about it felt the same. Because now, everyone in that room knew exactly who she was. And more importantly, they knew that whatever came next would not be decided for her. It would be decided by her. The moment did not end when she took the card. It lingered, stretched, and settled into something no one in that room had planned for. Naomi Brooks turned slightly, her movements smooth, controlled, as if the weight of what had just happened had not altered her rhythm at all. But the room knew better. Everyone knew better. Because the same woman who had been invisible less than an hour ago now carried a presence that could not be ignored. The deal was still on the table. The numbers still mattered. But the center of gravity had shifted, and it was no longer anchored to the man at the head of the table. Ethan Caldwell watched her as she stepped back into her role, or what used to be her role, adjusting a glass, clearing a plate with the same quiet precision she had shown when rewriting a problem worth $100 million. It was almost disorienting to watch, because nothing about her movement suggested she had just changed the course of that deal. And yet, everything about her presence proved that she had. One of the executives cleared his throat softly, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. "We should finalize the terms," he said, his voice careful, measured, as if testing whether it was safe to return to business. Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes followed Naomi for another second before shifting back to the table. "Do it," he said simply. No hesitation. No debate. The deal that had stalled for weeks began to move again, but this time, it moved with clarity. The revised model held. The projections aligned. The uncertainty that had once clouded every decision was gone, replaced by something far more stable. Not just in the numbers, in the room. As discussions resumed, voices regained their structure, their confidence, but there was a difference now. Subtle, but undeniable. The tone had changed. Softer, more aware. Because once you realize you have overlooked something important, you do not speak the same way again. Naomi continued her work without interruption, moving between the edges of the room, collecting empty glasses, replacing them with fresh ones, her presence quiet but no longer unnoticed. A few glances followed her now. Not dismissive, not curious, respectful, the kind that does not ask questions out loud but answers them internally. Ethan signed the final page of the agreement with a steady hand, sliding the pen back across the table as the last detail fell into place. "We are done here," he said. The words carried completion, but not closure, because something else had started, and it had nothing to do with the contract in front of him. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. Conversations resumed in lower tones as the tension that had once filled the room began to dissolve. But not entirely. Not completely. Because one thing remained. Ethan stood, adjusting his jacket slightly, his posture returning to the composed authority everyone expected from him. But when he turned, it was not toward the door. It was toward Naomi. She was near the far end of the table, placing a fresh glass beside an empty seat, her movements as steady as ever. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant, but intentional in a way that drew quiet attention from those still in the room. Naomi noticed him before he spoke. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze with the same calm expression she had held from the beginning. "The deal is finalized," he said. It was not information she needed. It was acknowledgement. Naomi gave a small nod. "I am glad it worked out," she replied. Ethan studied her for a moment, as if considering something he had not yet put into words. "You already knew it would," he said. Naomi did not smile, but there was a subtle warmth in her eyes. "I knew it could," she answered. Again, the distinction mattered. Ethan let out a quiet breath, something close to a small laugh, though it carried no humor. "Just understanding. You changed more than the outcome tonight," he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly, listening, but not interrupting. "You changed the way I look at the room," he added. The words were simple, but they held something heavier than any offer he had made before. Not power, not opportunity, perspective. Naomi considered that for a moment, then responded with the same clarity she had carried all night. "The room was always the same," she said. "You just did not see all of it." Ethan nodded slowly, accepting the truth in that without resistance. Around them, the last of the executives began to leave, the quiet shuffle of departure filling the space that had once been tense with expectation. But for a moment longer, the two of them stood there, not as CEO and waitress, not as power and position, but as two people who had just witnessed a shift neither of them could ignore. Naomi picked up her tray again, preparing to move on, to continue, to return to the rhythm of the night. But this time, the rhythm was different. Not because the room had changed, because it had finally been seen. The room did not return to what it was. Even as the last voices faded and the quiet hum of the city reclaimed the space, something remained, something subtle but permanent. Naomi Brooks moved through the final steps of her shift with the same steady rhythm, collecting the last of the glasses, aligning the chairs, restoring order to a room that had briefly revealed something far less structured than it appeared. But this time, every movement carried a different weight. Not because she had changed, but because the room had finally learned how to see her. Ethan Caldwell lingered longer than anyone expected. The others had left, their conversations trailing into the hallway, their minds already shifting back to numbers, projections, the next opportunity. But Ethan stayed, not out of obligation, out of thought. He stood near the window now, looking out over the city, the lights stretching endlessly into the distance. For years, that view had meant one thing to him: control, scale, ownership. Tonight, it meant something else: perspective. He turned slightly as Naomi approached, her tray now empty, her shift nearly finished. She stopped a few feet away, not waiting, not interrupting, simply present. Ethan looked at her, not as a question, not as a calculation, but as a recognition that had taken him far too long to reach. "You could have taken the money," he said quietly. It was not a challenge. It was an observation that carried the weight of everything she had chosen not to do. Naomi met his gaze, her expression calm, her posture unchanged. "It would not have meant the same thing to me," she replied. Ethan nodded once, slowly. Most people would not have said that. Naomi gave a small, almost imperceptible shift of her shoulders. "Most people are not me," she said. There was no pride in it. No distance. Just truth, stated without decoration. Ethan let out a quiet breath, something close to acceptance. And most people would have taken the position, he added. Naomi's eyes softened slightly, not in doubt, but in clarity. I did not say no, she said. I said not now. The distinction settled between them, quiet but firm. Ethan studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, as if marking something internally, something he would not forget. Then I will expect a call, he said. Naomi did not smile, but there was a subtle warmth in her expression. When the time is right, she replied. The words were not a promise. They were a direction. Outside, a car passed far below, its headlights tracing a brief line across the glass before disappearing into the distance. Time moved. The world moved. And yet, for a moment, the room felt still. Ethan stepped back slightly, adjusting his jacket once more, the familiar gesture returning, but with a difference now. Less armor. More awareness. You were never the smallest presence in this room, he said, his voice steady. We just treated you that way. Naomi held his gaze, letting the words settle without rushing to respond. Then she spoke, her voice calm, grounded in something deeper than the moment itself. People show you how they see the world, she said, not how the world actually is. Ethan nodded slowly, the truth of that landing without resistance. For someone who had built his life on understanding systems, patterns, behavior, it was a realization that extended far beyond the numbers on a page. It reached into the way he had seen people, the way he had missed them. Naomi picked up her tray again, her shift complete now, the night moving toward its quiet close. But before she turned to leave, she paused, just briefly. You built something powerful, she said, her tone even. Just do not forget to build it with the right perspective. Ethan did not respond immediately. He did not need to. The weight of her words had already settled into place, deeper than any agreement he had signed that night. Naomi gave a small nod, then turned, walking toward the service door with the same steady pace she had carried from the beginning. No rush, no hesitation, just forward. The door closed softly behind her, the sound barely audible, but final in its own quiet way. Ethan remained where he was, looking out at the city once more. But this time, he was not measuring it. He was seeing it. Not just the lights, not just the scale, the details in between, the parts that were easy to overlook, the parts that mattered. And somewhere in that shift, something fundamental changed. Not the room, not the deal, him. Because power had never really been about owning the space. It had always been about understanding it. And that night, the person who had been overlooked the most had been the one to teach him that.